Can you give me an intuitive understanding of farming? I mean, like to me, farming is like you sell some structured puts and collect premium, but perhaps there's a more sophisticated understanding than that.
Let me give you sort of like a toy model of it, which I actually think has a surprising amount of legitimacy for what farming could mean. Where do you start? You start with a company that builds a box. And in practice, this box, they probably dress it up to look like a life changing, world altering protocol that's going to replace all the big banks in 38 days or whatever. Maybe for now, actually ignore what it does or pretend it does literally nothing. It's just a box. So what this protocol is, it's called Protocol X. It's a box, and can take a token, you can take Ethereum, you can put it in the box, and can take it out of the box. Like you put it into the box, and you get like an IOU for having put it in the box, and then you can redeem that IOU back out for the token. So far, what we've described is the world's dumbest ETF or ADR or something like that. It doesn't do anything, but let you put things in it if you so chose. And then this protocol issues a token. We'll call it whatever X token. And X token promises that anything cool that happens because of this box is going to ultimately be usable by governance vote of holders of the X tokens. They can vote on what to do with any proceeds or other cool things that happen from this box. And of course, so far we haven't exactly given a compelling reason for why there ever would be any proceeds from this box. But I don't know, maybe there will be. So that's sort of where you start. And then you say, all right, well, you got this box and you got X token. And the box protocol declares or maybe votes via on-chain governance or something like that, that what they're going to do is they are going to take half of all the X tokens that will have reminted, maybe two-thirds though, two-thirds of all ever X tokens, and they're going to give them away for free to everyone who uses the box. So anyone who goes, takes some money, puts it in the box, each day they're going to airdrop 1% of the X tokens pro rata amongst everyone who's put money in the box. That's for now what X token does. It gets given away to the box people. And now what happens? Well, X token has some market cap, right? It's probably not zero. Let's say it's $20 million market cap, and a bunch of
By the
arbitrageurs
way,
come.
from like first principles, it should be zero, but okay.
Sure, okay. I completely reasonable comment.
Like, I mean, I don't, like that's not quite true, but it like when you describe it in this totally cynical way, it sounds like it should be zero. But go on.
Describe it this way: you might think, for instance, that in like 5 minutes with an internet connection, you could create such a box and such a token, and that it should reflect like it should be worth like $180 or something market cap for like that that effort that you put into it. In the world that we're in, if you do this, everyone's going to be like, "Ooh, box token. Maybe it's cool. If you buy a box token, that's going to appear on Twitter and it'll have a $20 million market cap." And of course, one thing that you could do is you could like make the float very low and whatever. Maybe there haven't been $20 million that have flowed into it yet. Maybe that's sort of like it's mark to market, fully diluted valuation or something. But I acknowledge that it's not totally clear that this thing should have market cap. But empirically, I claim it would have market cap.
I agree.
It shouldn't have any market cap in theory, but in practice, they always do. Okay.
That's right. So, and obviously already we're sort of hiding some of the magic in that, right? Like some of the magic is in like, how did you get that market cap to start with? But, whatever. We're going to move on from that for a second. So, X tokens being given out each day. All these like sophisticated firms are like, that's interesting. Like if the total amount of money in the box is $100 million, then it's going to yield $16 million this year in X tokens being given out for it. That's a 16% return. That's pretty good. We'll put a little bit more in, right? And maybe that happens until there are $200 million in the box. So, sophisticated traders and or people on crypto Twitter or other sort of similar parties go and put $200 million in the box collectively, and they start getting these X tokens for it, right? And now all of a sudden everyone's like, wow, people just decide to put $200 million in the box. This is a pretty cool box, right? Like this is a valuable box, as demonstrated by all the money that people have apparently decided should be in the box. And who are we to say that they're wrong about that? Like, this is I mean, boxes can be great. Look, I love boxes as much as the next guy, right? And so what happens now? All of a sudden, people are kind of recalibrating. It's like, well, $20 million, that's it. Like that market cap for this box, and it's been like 48 hours, and it already has $200 million, including from like sophisticated players in it. They're like, come on, that's too low, right? Like, and they look at these ratios: TVL, total value locked in the box, as a ratio to market cap of the box's token, and they're like 10x. That's insane. 1x is the norm. And so then, X token price goes way up, and now it's a $130 million market cap token because of the bullishness of people's usage of the box. And now all of a sudden, of course, the smart money, it's like, oh wow, like this thing's now yielding like 60% a year in X tokens. Of course, I'll take my 60% yield, right? So they pour another $300 million in the box, and you get a cycle, and then it goes to infinity, and then everyone makes money.
I think of myself as like a fairly cynical person, and
Yep.
that was so much more cynical
Yeah,
than how I would have described farming. Like, you're just like, well, I'm in the Ponzi business, and it's pretty good.
At no point did any of this require any sort of like economic case. It's just like other people put money in the box, and so I'm going to too, and then it's more valuable, so I'm going to put more money in. And at no point in the cycle did it seem to like describe any sort of like economic purpose.
So on the one hand, I think that's a pretty reasonable response. But let me play around with this a little bit, right? Because that's one framing of this, and I think there's like a sort of depressing amount of validity.
Can you comment on like the sustainability of that? Like,
yeah,
because like on the one hand you're like, well, $1 trillion of institutional money is going to come into Bitcoin. On the other hand, you're like, basically there are a lot of Ponzi's that have done really well.
Right. So okay, cool. I'll stay on the cynical route. Think about like cynically what could happen here. Well, okay, so you've got this box is kind of dumb, but like what's the end game, right? This box is worth 0, obviously, and like that, you can't like keep this market cap or something. But on the other hand, if everyone kind of now thinks that this box token is worth about $1 billion market cap, that's what people are pricing it at, and it sort of has that market cap. Everyone's going to market to market. In fact, you can even finance this, right? You can put X token in a borrow lending protocol and borrow dollars with it. If you think it's worth like less than 2/3 of that, you could even just like put some in there, take the dollars out, and never give the dollars back. You just get liquidated eventually. And it is sort of like real monetizable stuff in some senses. And at some point, like if the world never decides that we were wrong about this in like a coordinated way, right? Like you're kind of the guy calling bullshit and saying, no, this thing's actually worthless. But in what sense are you right?
Can I just ask on this point? I mean, so are you saying that the value has to derive from everyone agreeing that it's worth something? And I know, like, on the one hand, that seems like a simple point about crypto, but on the other hand, throughout crypto's history, there have been these different arguments about how it actually gets value, use cases for the underlying technology, for blockchain. Everyone's going to start migrating stuff on blockchain, and then you're going to have a real economic use attached to these assets, and that's where the value is going to come from. But are you saying that it depends more on everyone just agreeing that these are worth something?
So really what I'd say is that it could come in theory from either. You can sort of get a market cap either because of cash flow, right? And then like Warren Buffett's like, fuck this, like I'm going to buy this if it's at too cheap of a price, because I'll just buy it and own it and get cash flow from it, and that's great. Or you could see something get market cap in the way that, I don't know, Dogecoin or Shibcoin have, right? Where people are just kind of like, haha, and then they buy it. And if you're like, that's dumb, it has no cash flow, I'm going to short sell it, you lose all your money. And that those like, at least like over the last few years, those have both been ways that like assets have gotten market cap. And I sort of like think that this starts to hint at like at least some interesting angles on this, because like it's not just cryptocurrencies that have had this dynamic, right? Like how about like AMC or Hertz or GameStop or meme stocks in general have like a very similar pattern to this. And the sort of like concept of like maybe people will pay something for it even though it doesn't seem traditionally valuable is not a crypto specific concept, although it certainly has become like
Though with
Yeah, I
like
mean,
with AMC and GameStop, though, it's like usually that's the perception, and I'm not judging, but the perception is that it's sort of like a perversion of what the whole point of like the stock market is, as opposed to like this is going to be like the basis of like
well,
this new asset class.
I've written that sort of thing before. Like I would have sort of drawn the causality the other way. Like I've said that like, the rise of Bitcoin allowed for things like GameStop and AMC. But I also think that like there's a difference between something like Bitcoin where people are like, well, this thing is a store of value, and enough people accept that it becomes a store of value, and the box that you're describing where like no one has an emotional attachment to the box in your description, and I think also empirically, like what they have is an APY number, right? What they have is they're like, oh, this box is paying us a lot of money, so we're going to stay in it, right? So there's like with Bitcoin, you can sort of say there's a sustainable value because of like just sort of like a broad social acceptance, but like I feel like with a lot of this like farming stuff, like like it is box X. Like no one knows the name from day to day. It's just like this is the box that is yielding the most today, so I'm going to put money in. And I'm sort of curious about the sustainability of that.
Yeah, so certainly some of them are unsustainable, and some of them are, many of them by number end exactly the way you'd think that they would, right? Like the way these end is that like eventually people decide that this is no longer today's cool box, this is yesterday's lame box, and they go down a lot in price, and then people sort of move on to box number two. And if everyone did a careful accounting of where they ended up, I don't know, would they have made money? Would they not have? It's a little unclear. Like some people would have, some people wouldn't have. It's sort of messy. And that's like certainly how some of these quickly end up. But it's not how all of them do. And in particular, let's maybe revisit one of the earliest assumptions about this, right? The point where I said this is a box that does nothing but be a box, right? And that was like, I was being a little facetious there, although I do think it's like an important way to understand part of what's going on. But it's not really the case that the biggest of these claim to be a box that is nothing but a box. They claim to be a bit more than that. And, you can query how much you believe the story that their value at its heart is coming from them being more than just a box. But people certainly perceive them to be more than that. And, examples of this, right? Well, let's take, what are some of the most popular staking programs? They're like, historically Uniswap, Aave, Compound. These are various boxes that have an actual product tied to them that has like a narrative about why it might become the world's next big thing. Maybe it's going to be like the preeminent DEX. Maybe it's going to be the preeminent borrow lending protocol on chain. And this like, weird box staking thing starts out as just this sort of like sideshow to the bigger story of we're going to change the world with the protocol that we just built. Now, sometimes that sideshow becomes the main show itself, because sometimes, in the end, what really happens is that like the box plus yield nature of it becomes more popular than the original use case of it, but it makes it at least seem a bit less dumb and a bit less circular and a bit more like, there's something real that many of these are drawing on and a real hope that it's going to become itself a valuable protocol.